Hello. Jake Drake, Teacher's Pet, Chapter 9. Crash landing, but safe. The lunchroom wasn't any better. In the milk line, a 4th grader asked me how come I wasn't cleaning tables yet. Then a 5th grade kid said, "Hey, look, it's the original garbage guy." And when I was walking over to where Willie was sitting, a girl in Mrs. Frule's class said, "Hey, Jake, Miss Cott was talking about you in art class today. She says you're so sweet." And then a whole bunch of girls started to giggle. I sat down and tossed Willie his chocolate milk. I said, "Hi, so you think it's safe to sit with me today?" "Yeah, I think so. Looks like you're still famous." I nodded and bit into my peanut butter sandwich. Yeah, guess I'm going to have to learn to live with it. I leaned my head back and took a long drink of milk, but I stopped. Something was wrong with Willie. With his face, Willie looked like one of those kids in Jurassic Park when the Tyrannosaurus Rex is trying to eat their car. I put my milk carton down and said, "What's wrong?" And Willie whispered, "Mrs. Carp, coming this way, fast." I turned around and Willie wasn't kidding. Mrs. Carp was headed across the cafeteria. Every kid was watching her. She had this awful look on her face, and she was walking fast and in a straight line toward us. She came right up to me, and I could feel my face turn white. My heart was pounding. Mrs. Carp glared down at me. She was so tall, and it was like her face was made of stone. Without saying a word, she reached down and took hold of my arm above the elbow. Then real loud she said, "You're coming to the office with me right now." Willie looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Then Mrs. Carp turned around and started walking. She was still holding onto my arm, and it probably looked like she was dragging me across the cafeteria. And as we walked past with everyone staring at me in this loud voice, Mrs. Carp said, "We have some things to talk about, young man, about the ropes in gym class and about your behavior in the art room and about something that happened Tuesday out on the playground." I looked up, and at one of the lunch tables, Danny Grumson was smiling at me and nodding his head. Then he put out his pointer finger and pointed it straight across his throat. As Mrs. Carp started pulling me across the big room, I felt myself start to blush, and I thought, that's the last time I'll ever trust a principal. I thought I was so smart to go and talk to her. Now she's probably going to call my mom and dad, too. Then we were out the door, down the steps, and along the front hallway and into her office. I hate it when I feel like I'm going to cry, especially at school. But that's how I felt. I kept my eyes on the floor. I sat in the chair in front of Mrs. Carp's desk, and when I heard her sit in her chair, I looked up at her. Then I looked away real quick and then back again, because I couldn't believe my eyes. Mrs. Carp was smiling, a big, warm, friendly smile. I kept staring at her and she said, "How was that?" I shook my head. "What? How was what?" "My performance. How did you like my performance?" And Mrs. Carp kept on smiling. "I guess it was pretty good if it fooled you, too. Sorry, but I had to make it look real." I shook my head, still trying to understand. "Then you're not mad at me?" She shook her head, still smiling. "No, not at all. Remember this morning when I told you I'd think about your problem? Well, I did. And what just happened? That was my solution. And that's what I got. It was all an act. I said, 'But the ropes in gym class? I really did that.' Mrs. Carp said, 'I talked with Mr. Collins, and he understands everything, and you will be doing more push-ups and sit-ups tomorrow.'" "In art class?" I asked. "Yes, Miss Cott will be making quite a big speech to you on Friday about how wrong it was to destroy school property, which is true, of course. You shouldn't have broken that paintbrush." Then Mrs. Carp looked at her watch. "Well, I think it's safe for you to go back and have the rest of your lunch now. But remember, Jake, this has to be our secret, or it's going to look like I've given you special treatment. And we wouldn't want anyone to think that, now would we?" And at that moment, if Mrs. Carp had wanted to pat me on the head, I wouldn't have minded it one bit. So that was how the longest 4 days of my life finally ended. And I never told anyone about Mrs. Carp's great performance, not even Willie. The rest of my lunch tasted great that Thursday, and I wish you could have seen the way everyone looked at me when I walked back into the cafeteria and sat down to eat. Some kids looked at me like I was an escaped criminal. Some kids looked at me like I was a hero coming back from a war. Some kids looked at me like they were afraid to look at me. But nobody, not one kid, not one teacher, not one cafeteria lady, looked at me like I have ever been Jake Drake, Teacher's Pet. The end.